You wouldn't survive a day in the time of the plague. Part 1. The Traveller. Before we begin, take a deep breath. Subscribe if you haven't already. It helps this sleepy little corner grow. And tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? The road was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that settles in after something terrible has happened. I hadn't seen another soul in over 2 days. No carts, no horses, no smoke curling from chimneys. Just me and the wind. I had arrived at the edge of a village I didn't recognize, though it looked like every other I'd passed since the sickness began. Small homes, thatched roofs, a chapel spire tilting slightly to one side, but no sound, no smell of bread, no chickens, just stillness. The wooden gate creaked when I pushed it open. It wasn't locked. Nothing was. Not anymore. A few chickens pecked absently at the earth near the well. They didn't startle when I passed. Even they seemed tired. A cart lay on its side in the mud. The wheel had snapped, or maybe someone had pushed it over in desperation. Flies buzzed around something beneath the tarp. I didn't look. I had learned not to look. The last village had taught me that. I passed a cottage with the door ajar. A black mark was painted on the wood. Crude, jagged, a warning. Inside it was dark. A bowl of soup still sat on the table, crusted over now with mold. A single boot lay near the hearth. A child's, I think. The bed in the corner had been stripped bare, but I knew what had been there. I could feel it in the air, the kind of grief that lingers. I stepped back outside and pulled the door gently closed. It wouldn't matter. But still, it felt wrong to leave it open. I continued down the lane. My pack was lighter than I liked. A crust of bread, 2 apples, and a flask of water. I had not eaten that day. My stomach didn't care anymore. Hunger had become familiar, like an old ache that had settled into my ribs and decided to stay. The chapel was intact. The bell tower had birds nesting in it, but the door still stood. I stepped inside. Dust floated like ash in the air. The altar was bare. Someone had tried to burn incense. A bundle of herbs lay charred at the base of the steps. Rosemary, maybe, or lavender. Something to mask the smell. But it hadn't worked. I could still smell it beneath the wood and dust and age. Death. I knelt beside the altar and stayed there for a while. Not praying, just being still. The stone floor was cold through my boots. My legs ached. My eyes stung. Outside, the wind moved again. A shutter banged softly against a window. A door creaked. Nothing else. I left the chapel and walked to the edge of the village. There, on a hill, was the burial pit. A long, narrow trench, covered now with branches and dirt. But not enough dirt, not enough to keep the flies away. I had been on the road for 3 weeks. Or was it 4? Time didn't work the way it used to. I moved from place to place, searching for, I'm not sure, safety? Other survivors? Maybe just a place where the air didn't feel like it was holding its breath? Some places were burned, entire towns, torched by those who believed flame could cleanse what man could not. Others were just empty, like this one. As night approached, I found a home near the orchard. It was cleaner than most. Someone had tried to keep it. The table was set, though the plates were dusty. There was a blanket folded on the bed. I lit a candle and sat. And for a moment, I imagined I was just passing through, that the family had gone to market and would be back before dusk. That they would walk in, surprised to see me, and ask if I wanted stew. But no one came. They never did. And so I sat in the glow of the candle, listening to the wind. watching the shadows and waiting for sleep or silence or morning, whichever came first. Part 2. The Black Mark. The morning brought fog. It crept low over the grass, curling around stone and wood like fingers looking for something lost. The orchard behind the cottage was quiet. No bees, no birds, just the sound of my boots brushing fallen leaves as I walked. The apples had rotted where they dropped. Software brown. Flies buzzed lazily above them. I hadn't meant to stay the night, but the silence inside that house had felt safe, or as close to safe as anything could feel now. I stepped out into the grey, my breath curling in front of me like smoke. The village had not changed. It was still empty, still watching. As I moved down the lane, I saw more doors marked with black, thick, uneven strokes. Some just an X, others a crude cross. One door had the word God scrawled above it in charcoal. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. The people who had once lived here had tried everything. Herbs hung from the rafters, salt rings at doorsteps, prayers carved into walls. None of it had worked. The sickness still came. I paused near a home with broken shutters. Inside, the table had been overturned. Dried herbs lay scattered across the floor like brittle confetti. A chair had been pushed up against the door from the inside. Someone had locked themselves in, but the door stood open now. I didn't go in. Not out of fear, out of respect. Some houses were like graves. You didn't step inside unless you had reason. Further on, near the well, I saw signs of what had happened at the end. Scraps of clothing. A child's doll, arms missing. A wheelbarrow tipped over and half buried in mud. And near the base of the well, marks in the earth. Dragged feet. A line where something heavy had been pulled. No blood. Just silence. I had seen plague before. I'd seen the sores, black and swollen, under arms and between legs. I'd seen the rashes, the coughing, the blood. I'd smelled the sweet rot that came near the end. It clung to everything. Skin, clothing, memory. No matter how far I walked, I carried it with me. I could smell it here too. Faint. Beneath the smoke and the ash and the earth. That was the thing no one told you. It wasn't the sickness itself that broke you. It was the way it stayed. In your nose, in your clothes, in your dreams. I walked to the edge of the village. There, beside a tree, was a small wooden cross. No name, no date, just the cross. Someone had buried a loved one, or maybe just someone. That's all you could do then. A body was a danger, a blessing, a burden, and a goodbye. I knelt beside it for a moment. Not to pray, I didn't do that anymore, but to remember that this had once been someone's life, and because one day, someone might do the same for me. Back in the cottage, I sat again by the candle. I ate a piece of bread, hard at the edges, and drank from the flask. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and stared at the flame. The wind outside whispered through the cracks in the wall, and I knew. Tomorrow I would leave. Because the black marks were not just on the doors, they were in the air, in the silence. And I had stayed too long. Part 3. The fevered ones, I left the cottage at dawn. The road curved between trees, stripped bare by wind and time. Mist hung in the hollows, stretching like thread across the path. My feet knew how to move forward, even when my mind felt buried in the past. I passed fields left untended, overgrown with weeds, fences leaning like drunkards in the cold. A scarecrow stood limp in one of them, its straw hat tilted, its face rotted by rain. Everything leaned now. Buildings, fences, people. The ones who were still alive, if you could call it living. Midday brought me to another village, smaller than the last. 3 cottages, a barn and a chapel. No movement, but one door wasn't shut. It hung open just slightly, rocking back and forth in the breeze. I didn't want to go in, but I did. Inside was the smell I knew too well. Sweat, sickness, and something underneath it all that made your throat close. The light was dim. The shutters had been closed tight, as if they could keep death from peering in. On the bed, under a thick wool blanket, someone still breathed. A woman, maybe 30. Her eyes were closed. Her skin shone with sweat. A bowl of water beside her had long since gone cloudy. She didn't stir. I knelt beside her. She had the marks, black and blistered, blooming like bruises beneath her jaw and in the crook of her arm. She was past help. But I stayed a while. Not to speak, not to heal, just to be there. I whispered something, I don't even remember what, and placed a clean cloth on her forehead. She didn't wake. Outside the room, the rest of the house was still. A candle had melted down to a stub. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling, brittle and brown. A piece of bread sat untouched on the table. There was no sign of anyone else. Maybe they had fled, or died, or simply disappeared. I left the house quietly, closing the door behind me. Not to lock her in, but to protect what dignity remained. The barn had signs of recent life, a blanket on the hay, a bucket with water. Someone had been sleeping there, but not now. I stayed that night, curled in the loft, listening to the wind shift between the beams. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. There were still things worse than plague wandering these roads, and not all of them were sick. At first light, I gathered my things, took a bit of bread and a handful of dried berries I found in a pouch. Before I left, I returned to the cottage. The woman was gone. Still, cold. At peace, perhaps. I placed the blanket over her face. Then I stepped into the road. Because you didn't survive the plague by staying, you survived it by leaving. Part 4. The healer's house. The forest road twisted sharply uphill, lined with roots that broke the earth like ribs beneath skin. I climbed slowly, the morning sun struggling through a fog that refused to lift. They said the healer had lived up here, just past the ridge. People had walked miles to see her once, bringing eggs, coins, and candles in exchange for mixtures and prayers. Now, no one walked this way. Except me. The cottage appeared suddenly, half hidden behind a stand of trees. It leaned against a stone wall, its roof still intact, its windows shuttered tight. I paused at the gate. A crow perched on the fence post, tilted its head at me. It didn't fly away. That was the first sign something was wrong. The door was marked, but not with blacked paint like the others. This was carved deep into the wood. A circle with a slash through it. I didn't know what it meant. Maybe protection. Maybe warning. Maybe both. I knocked. Waited. Nothing. I tried the door. It creaked open on heavy hinges. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dried herbs, ash, and something sour. The walls were lined with shelves, bottles, scrolls, bundles of roots. A long table held bowls of dried berries, strips of cloth, melted wax. And there, in the corner by the hearth, sat the healer. Old, frail, still breathing. Her eyes opened slowly as I stepped in. They were pale, rimmed in red. "You're late," she rasped. I froze. "I wasn't coming for anything," I said quietly. "Only passing through." She gave a dry chuckle, then coughed. "Everyone comes for something." I moved slowly, sitting across from her at the table. She watched me with eyes that had seen too much. "You've seen it?" she asked. I nodded. more than I wanted to. She poured something from a clay jug into 2 cups. It smelled of sage and vinegar. I drank. It burned. "You're not sick yet," she said, "but you're carrying it. Not in your blood. In your mind. That's worse." I said nothing. She leaned back, wrapped in a shawl that looked like it had once been white. I tried to help them. All of them. The poultices, the teas, the smoke. I even prayed once. Didn't do a damn thing. Outside, the wind picked up. The crow was still there. "I buried 13 here," she said. "None family. All strangers. Like you." "I'm not staying," I said. "Number. But you'll remember." She looked toward the window. "They always do." I asked her why she stayed. "Because someone has to witness it," she said. "Someone has to carry the names." She gestured toward a book by the fire, its pages filled with handwriting, uneven and frantic. I wrote them all. Everyone I treated, everyone I lost, every name I could get before they stopped speaking. I reached for the book, but she shook her head. "Number, you have your own." When I left, she didn't say goodbye, just turned back toward the fire, her shadow long and thin against the stone. The crow watched me from the fence. As I passed, it cawed once. Not a warning, not a welcome. Something in between. That night, I camped near the edge of the trees. I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, because for the first time, I felt like someone had seen me. And that was harder to carry than silence. Part 5. The Burned Village. By mid-morning, I was walking along the ridge where the trees thinned and the earth turned black. The scent hit before the smoke, ash, charcoal, and something beneath it. Something human. I followed the trail down into a hollow where a village once stood. Now, it was just ruin. Roofs collapsed inward. Doors were gone, or charred to their hinges. Walls blackened, soot-streaked. No birds, no wind, not even insects. Fire had done what the sickness hadn't. It had erased everything. There were no signs of struggle, no bodies left behind. Just silence. In one corner, where the stone well still stood, a row of scorched stakes remained in the ground, like the teeth of something buried. Someone had made a decision here, a hard one. Burn it all. Bury nothing. Leave no trace. I didn't blame them. I stepped over collapsed beams and scattered pots. A doll's head, half melted, lay beside what might have once been a schoolhouse. Smoke still rose in slow curls from deep under the timbers. The fire had been recent, a week, maybe less. They'd tried to kill the plague with fire, but fire doesn't kill memory. In what remained of the chapel, the bell was gone. A simple iron cross had fallen from its place above the doorway and lay flat on the ground, cracked down the center. I picked it up, held it, then placed it back where it had fallen. Not because I believed, but because something deserved to be put right. Further down the path, past the ruins, I found a single house, untouched by the flames. It sat on a slope above the rest, a watchman's perch. Its windows were shuttered, but there was no lock on the door. Inside, the air was cool, preserved. A table, 2 chairs, a pitcher of water, clean linens folded on the cot, and a single line scratched into the wood above the hearth. We could not save them, but we did not run. I slept there that night. I didn't light a fire. Outside, the burned village glowed faintly beneath the stars. And as I lay beneath the blanket, I thought of the people who had stayed. Not out of fear or duty, but something else. A need to witness. Like the healer, to choose not to flee, even when death was certain. I don't know if it was brave or foolish. but it was something I carried with me when I left. Part 6. Ashes and Bells. The path eastward was darker, lined with trees that grew too close and leaned too far inward, as if trying to keep secrets. The soil was scorched in places, and the smell of smoke clung to my cloak for days. I passed no other travelers. No voices called out. Even the animals seemed to have fled or fallen silent. At midday, I found a cart overturned in the ditch, its wheels shattered. A cracked bell lay beside it, blackened with soot. I touched it. The metal was cold. A bell without a tower. A sound no one had heard in weeks, maybe longer. I made camp beneath a copse of alder trees, where moss grew thick and the ground felt softer. I boiled water and chewed on hard bread. That night I dreamed of bells, not the sharp, sudden clang of warning, but slow, low tolls, one for each death, one for each door marked black. I woke before dawn. My hands were clenched, my mouth dry. The silence was worse after dreams like that. As I moved through the valley the next morning, the mist thickened. I walked with one hand out, brushing branches and tall grass to keep my bearings. Then I heard it. Faint. Distant. A bell. At first I thought it was memory, echo playing tricks on me. But it rang again. Once. Twice. Steady. Real. I followed the sound. At the edge of the trees, the fog parted just enough to reveal a stone tower rising above the canopy. The chapel beneath it was small, square, and cracked with age, but it stood. And beside it, people. 3 of them, hooded, still. One pulled the bell rope with slow rhythm, while the others stood with heads bowed. As I approached, they turned, not in fear, not in welcome, just acknowledgement. The one nearest the door gestured inside. I stepped past him without a word. Within, candles burned low. Parchments lined the walls, lists of names, too many to count. The air was thick with incense and dust. A single bench sat near the altar. I took it, and for the first time in days, I let myself sit without watching the door. Outside, the bell continued to toll, not for panic, not for death, but for remembrance. I stayed until the candle at my side burned to its end. Then I stood, nodded to the hooded figures, who returned the motion with solemn silence, and stepped back into the fog. The bell rang once more behind me. It followed me down the path, fading slowly into the hush of the valley. Part 7. The crows at dusk. The hills began to level as the fog cleared, and for the first time in days I saw open sky, pale and bruised with dusk, but sky nonetheless. I followed a broken fence line toward a field that had once been green. Now it was mostly mud and bone, the white tips of ribs and femurs poking through the soil like roots that had grown the wrong way. The crows came as I walked. At first, just 1 or 2, then dozens, black shapes flitting across the horizon, wings silent, eyes sharp. They circled low, but not over me, over something just beyond the rise. I crested the hill slowly. What lay below had once been a camp. Tents, some collapsed, others burned. A cart on its side, bedding, books and bowls scattered as if left mid-use. And in the center, bodies. Not buried, not covered, just left. The crows feasted in silence. They didn't scatter as I approached. They watched me, unbothered, as if I were just another ghost. I covered my mouth with cloth and stepped through. The dead were dressed like travelers, cloaks, boots, satchels, not villagers, not monks, people like me. But not like me, because they had stopped. One body still held a book, its pages damp and unreadable. Another had their fingers wrapped around a small locket. A woman's hand, delicate, still reaching toward the collapsed tent. I forced myself not to look at their faces. Looking made it worse. At the far end of the camp, near the ashes of a cooking fire, I found a small journal. The ink had run in places, but I could make out the last entry. We heard the bells again last night, but no one is left to ring them. I closed the book and placed it back where I'd found it. Then I built a small pile of stones beside it. It wasn't enough, but it was something. As the sun dipped below the tree line, the sky bled orange and ash. The crows rose together, their wings blotting out the light. They moved not in panic, but with purpose, a slow spiral into the darkening air. I stood in the center of the field, surrounded by the remains of a night that had never ended. And I whispered to no one, "I saw you." Because sometimes the only gift the living can give is witness. Part 8. Lanterns in the fog. I walked for hours without knowing where I was going. The sky had turned grey again, the kind of grey that made it impossible to know the time. Every direction looked the same. Fields giving way to trees, trees giving way to fog. There were no paths now, only soft earth and bent grass, pressed down by time and wind and silence. Then I saw it. A flicker. Light, pale and gold, floating low in the mist. A lantern. At first I thought it was a trick, a reflection or a dream, my mind playing games after too many nights without rest. But then another appeared beside it. Then a third, further off. They didn't move quickly. They bobbed gently, swaying as if carried by hands unseen. I followed. Because that's what you do when you've run out of direction. The lights led me through a narrow pass between twisted trees. Branches clawed at my sleeves. The ground was slick with moss and old leaves. And still, the lanterns glowed ahead, like stars fallen too low. Then I saw them. Figures, wrapped in cloaks, hoods low, carrying the lights. They said nothing. They didn't look back, just moved ahead, one step at a time. I didn't speak. Words felt too loud for a place like this. The procession led into a clearing where dozens more lanterns had been placed in a circle on the ground. At the center, a stone platform covered in candles, parchment, bones, names. They were writing names, scratched into wood, inked onto cloth, painted onto stone. The names of the lost, the names of those no one else would remember. I knelt beside an old man who carved slowly, his hands shaking. He looked at me once, then handed me a piece of slate. No words were exchanged. I stared at the slate for a long time. Then I wrote a name. Not someone I knew, not family. Just one I remembered. Because that's what mattered. That someone, somewhere, still remembered. I left the slate with the others, stepped back, watched the lanterns flicker in the fog. The people around me stood quietly, heads bowed, holding their lights against the dark. And for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped running from death. Not to welcome it, but to face it. Together. Part 9. The Village of Stone. The fog began to lift by mid-morning, and the sky cracked open just enough to let through a sliver of gold. I walked east through a patch of low hills where moss draped like old cloth over crumbled walls. That's when I saw it. The village. But this one was different. The homes were made of stone, not wood. Solid, square things that looked like they had grown from the earth itself. Some had collapsed under time and rot, but many still stood. No black marks on the doors, no signs of fire, just quiet and stillness. I passed under a carved arch at the village edge. The inscription had long faded, but a small symbol remained. A hand holding a flame, a sign of protection or memory. Maybe both. Inside, the streets were swept, carefully. Candles burned low in iron holders. Empty bowls had been stacked neatly by a well. Someone had lived here recently, or still did. I knocked on a door, not expecting an answer. But it opened. A woman stood inside, older, pale. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. She looked at me, then stepped aside. I entered. The room smelled of herbs and soapstone. A fire burned low in the hearth. Bread sat cooling on the table. There were other signs: blankets folded, a book open, a stool pulled out from beneath a desk. This was not an abandoned place. She finally spoke. "You've come from the west." I nodded. "Then you've seen what's left." Again I nodded. She motioned for me to sit. I did. She poured tea, slow and careful, as if the ritual itself mattered more than the drink. When we both had a cup, she asked, "Why are you still walking?" The question startled me. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Habit, maybe. Or fear of stopping?" She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "I used to walk," she said, "until I realized there's nowhere left to go that isn't broken." She told me there were 7 others in the village. All quiet, all surviving. They lit candles each night and read names aloud from memory. They kept the stones clean. They burned herbs. Not because they believed it cured anything, but because it felt like resistance. Not to death, to forgetting. I stayed one night. They gave me a room with a small window that looked out onto a square where the wind whispered between stones. I did not sleep. I watched the sky shift from grey to indigo, and I thought about what it meant to survive. Not to live forever, just long enough to be remembered. Part 10. The Road Behind the Moon. I left the stone village before dawn. The woman who had offered me shelter didn't wake, or if she did, she let me go without a word. The sky was pale and hollow, that in-between color just before morning truly arrives. The road eastward was barely a road at all, more a suggestion of one. But I followed it, because the walking was easier than stopping, and I knew now that I wouldn't turn back. The hills grew steeper. The trees thinned. In the distance, I saw the jagged line of mountains, rising like broken teeth against the horizon. Somewhere beyond them was the coast. I had never seen the sea. People used to say the salt air kept the plague away. They were wrong, but I still wanted to see it. By midday, I found a signpost, rotted and half collapsed. One arm still pointed forward, etched with faded letters. Moon Path. A village? A road? A story? I didn't know, but I followed it. As I climbed higher, the wind sharpened. My cloak pulled tighter around me. I passed a ruined house, perched on the cliffside. Walls gone, only a chimney standing like a monument to loneliness. There were etchings on the stones near it. Names, dates, prayers. Some fresh, some ancient. I traced one with my finger. We walked through the fire and left no footprints. I didn't understand it. Not fully, but it stayed with me. That night, I made camp beneath an overhang of stone. The moon rose full and golden above the peaks. The wind howled softly through the cracks like distant voices trying to find each other. I didn't light a fire, just watched the stars. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something like peace. Not hope, not safety, just stillness. A pause between steps, a breath held by the earth. And I let it hold me. Part 11. The house that waited. There was no path, just the suggestion of one. A line where the grass lay flatter, where the trees bent ever so slightly, as if bowing to something long past. I followed it, because I had followed everything else. It led upward, through thickets of pine and crumbled stone, until the forest thinned, and the wind grew sharp enough to cut. At the top of the hill stood a house. Alone. Not like the others I'd passed. Not rotted, not scorched. This one stood clean and whole, its shutters closed, its chimney intact, its walls neither bowed nor blackened by fire. It waited. I paused at the tree line, unsure. The air here felt different, heavy but not with fear. With something else. Like memory. Like a book left open, waiting for the next hand to turn the page. The door was shut. No symbols, no warnings. Just wood and quiet. I stepped closer. The grass crunched underfoot. I touched the handle, cool iron, and pushed gently. It opened. Inside, the silence wrapped itself around me like a second skin. Thick. Absolute. The kind that pressed against your ribs from the inside. A long hallway stretched ahead. Candles lined the walls, unlit but fresh. New wax, trimmed wicks. Someone had been here. Maybe someone still was. The floor creaked beneath my steps. The scent of lavender clung to the air, faint as if it had been left there days before and never disturbed. Each room I passed was perfectly still. A chair angled toward a window. A book placed face down on a table. A teacup, half full. Dust hadn't settled on anything. It was like someone had stood up and left, and expected to return. Upstairs, the air was colder. The wind touched the shutters and whispered through the cracks. I found a room with a bed that looked recently made. Blankets smoothed, a nightgown folded at the foot. Beside it, a comb and mirror, and a note. The parchment was folded once and left on the pillow. No seal, no name. I opened it. If you've come this far, you're not lost, just tired. Rest if you must, but do not stay too long. This house remembers everything. There was no signature. I sat in the chair near the hearth and waited for something I couldn't name. The quiet pressed in, not cruelly, but insistently, like a question left unanswered too long. Eventually, I slept, and I dreamed. In the dream, I was walking again, but not alone. Shadows moved beside me, not threatening, just present. We didn't speak, but I felt their recognition. The ones I'd seen, the ones I'd buried, the ones I never knew but remembered anyway. They led me back through the road behind the moon, to the lanterns, to the chapel, to the healer. I saw each place again, but changed, grown over, greener, softer. The black marks were gone, and at the center of it all, the house, lit from within, waiting. When I woke, the light had changed. Afternoon, maybe, or early morning again. Time slipped here, elastic and slow. I stood. My joints ached from stillness. On the nightstand beside the bed, a second note had appeared. You are not alone. That was all. I didn't question it. I folded the note, placed it in my coat, and I left. Outside, the world felt sharper, more real. The fog had lifted entirely, the mountains clearer, the trees less bent, as though something had been seen and answered. I turned back only once. The house stood exactly as before, silent, unchanged, waiting. Part 12. The Forgotten Shore. I walked for 3 days with the sound of the wind in my ears and the weight of silence on my shoulders. Each night I found a hollow beneath trees or a patch of grass not too wet to lie in. I slept light, dreamt of voices I had never met, of fires never lit, of hands I almost remembered holding. And then, on the 4th morning, I smelled salt. The air changed, lighter, sharper, filled with something alive. The wind no longer carried the scent of decay or ash, just seaweed, wet stone, distant tides. I quickened my steps. The land sloped downward, slowly at first, then suddenly. And there it was, the sea, grey, endless, cold. But there, and on its edge, the remnants of a place once called a port. The docks had rotted through. Boats lay shattered along the shore like carcasses washed up from a forgotten war. Nets fluttered in the wind like ghosts. Houses sat collapsed or leaning, some with their walls stripped away by storms. But someone had lived here. Once. Signs remained. Fishhooks rusted into shape. A child's shoes lined up neatly on a stone step. A painted sign swinging on one hinge, salt and anchor. I walked the full length of the shore, past what had been a market square, a chapel, a row of inns with names long since worn away. No one answered my steps, but I didn't feel alone. I sat on the sand, watched the tide roll in, watched the sun fall behind the water, and I thought about the ones who had come here, fleeing the plague, the ones who had believed the sea could save them. Maybe it had for a while, or maybe nothing had. Maybe they had simply found peace. I made camp inside a broken house, with its roof torn away but its walls mostly intact. I placed my last candle in the windowsill, lit it. Not because I expected anyone to see it, but because it felt right. A beacon not for rescue, but for memory. That night, I did not dream. I simply slept. And when I woke, the world felt different. Lighter. Still broken, still quiet, but not hollow. Just waiting. Like the house, like the lanterns, like me. There was nowhere else to walk. So I stayed. And in time, others found the shore. Not many, but enough. They did not ask for stories. They simply joined the silence, brought new firewood, mended nets, sat on the sand at sunset and listened to the sea. Together. Alive. Part 13. The Last Light. The days passed in rhythm, not marked by clocks nor chimes, nor the toll of bells, but by the sea, its tide, its mood, its song. At dawn, the sky opened in dull blues and pale golds, and we gathered what had washed ashore: driftwood, kelp, glass worn smooth by time. At dusk, we lit our lanterns, not because we feared the dark, but because we had learned that even in stillness, light meant something. No one led. No one claimed the role of keeper. We were a scattered handful who had found each other, not by direction, but by gravity, drawn together by the ache to survive and the greater ache to remember. The shore gave back what the roads had taken, quiet without dread, stillness without sorrow, days not filled with flight, but with breath. We did not speak much, but we were present, and that, I had come to believe, was enough. I took to writing names, not the ones I'd known. Most were long gone, faded like ink in water. But the ones I remembered seeing scrawled on doors, whispered in dreams, scribbled in books I passed, names I read from chapel walls, or etched into stone at the edge of unmarked fields. Each name I wrote on a small piece of cloth tied with thread and hung in the empty frame of a window facing the sea. Over time, they danced in the wind like prayer flags, faded, frayed. But they remained. One morning, as I traced the edge of the tide with my steps, I saw a boat, a real one, not wrecked or burned, but floating, slow and steady, cutting through the early fog. I watched it come, alone. It grounded softly on the sand. A woman stepped out. She didn't speak, just nodded. She carried nothing but a pack and a small lantern, unlit. I helped her pull the boat higher. She joined us. That was all. With her came others, over time, one by one, each of them drawn not by promise, but by silence. Some stayed, others left again, pulled by roads not yet finished, but each brought something, a song, a story, a piece of cloth for the window, and each added to the weight of this place, not heavy like grief, heavy like meaning. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the water, I walked to the edge of the rocks where the cliffs turned steep and sharp. There, balanced on stone, I placed the final lantern I had kept since the beginning. The one from the village with the healer. I lit it. The flame flickered, caught, glowed. And as the darkness crept in, I watched that single point of light hold its place against the void. We gathered behind it, all of us. No words, no ritual, just breathe and presence. And as the stars came out above, one by one, I thought, perhaps this is what it means to endure. Not to win, not to cure, but to be, to burn, to remain lit, even after everything else has gone dark. That night, as the sea whispered against the shore, I wrote the last name. Not mine, just one I knew would be forgotten if I didn't. I tied the cloth to the last empty window frame and let the wind carry it. Part 14. The Lantern Keeper. There was no more journey to make, and yet I still walked. Each morning I followed the beach, letting the sea trace lines beside my footprints. I didn't go far, only far enough to remind myself there was still a horizon, still distance, still something beyond. The shore had become home, but the act of walking, of looking, remained. We all did it. The others who had come, one, by boat or by foot. We kept the same quiet rhythm. We worked. We gathered. We sat in silence together. But we also searched, not for people, not for safety. We searched for signs of what the world had once been and what it was becoming. I found a lantern one morning, tangled in driftwood. Not one of ours. This was older. Square, made of thick, salt-pitted glass, its frame rusted and battered by years at sea. It had no wick, no oil, but still I carried it back. It had travelled far, I imagined, from a port where no one lived, from a ship where the last words were spoken long ago. But it had made it, and that meant something. I repaired the lantern as best I could, cleaned the glass, sealed the base with wax, added a fresh wick and oil. Then I lit it. It burned low, steady. I set it atop a flat rock near the village edge, where the tide didn't reach, where it could be seen from the cliffs, where it would not be mistaken for anything but what it was, a message, not a beacon, a memory. The others brought their own, old lanterns, new ones, some cobbled from scrap and glass jars, others taken from ruined carts, pulled from wreckage, crafted by hand. We built shelves into the cliff face and filled them with light, each one burning for a person remembered, or a place visited, or a silence held. There was no ceremony, no marking of time, just light, just presence. One evening, a boy came with a note. He didn't speak much, none of us did, but he handed it to me with care. It read, "For the healer in the hills." I gave him the lantern I'd fixed. He carried it to the center shelf, knelt, and placed it between two others. He lit it with trembling hands and walked away. He didn't need to say more. As time moved forward, slowly, gently, more people found us. We didn't grow large, but we grew real. We planted, fished, built roofs that didn't leak, created benches carved with lines from old journals, names etched into their edges. A well was dug, a windbreak erected. But it was the lantern wall that remained the heart of the place. It became a map of the forgotten, a lighthouse of grief and love and quiet testimony. Sometimes I sat beside it long into the night, watching flames flicker behind warped glass. Some burned brightly, others sputtered, but they held on, just like us. In the end, maybe that was the truest thing about the plague. It took, and took, but we remembered, and the memory was light, and the light did not die. Part 15. The winter without names. The winter came slowly. We had prepared, stacked wood, dried fish, stored grains in sealed barrels. We patched every roof and stuffed cloth into the cracks around doors. But no matter how ready we were, winter always arrived with its own mind. It wasn't cruel, not at first. The air cooled, the sea grew restless, the birds flew elsewhere. The wind sang different songs, but as the weeks passed, it became harder to keep the lanterns lit. The oil thickened in the cold. The flames stuttered, some going out without sound, like sighs disappearing into snow. We relit them, of course, but each extinguished flame felt like a name slipping further from memory. We stopped counting the days. The sun barely rose above the sea. Time was no longer hours or minutes. It became firewood burned, loaves baked, shoulders touched. We spoke even less, not out of sorrow, but reverence. Winter asks for silence. It asks you to listen, not talk. It makes you remember who you are when nothing distracts you from yourself. We kept journals now, not for ourselves, but for the future. The boy wrote in his with charcoal, small and careful letters. The woman from the stone village stitched names into cloth. I added more entries to the book I had carried since the chapel, where the bell still rang in my dreams. Even when no one else would read them, the words mattered. They marked time in ink and fibre when daylight no longer did. One night the storm came. It howled against our homes, rattled the shutters, stripped the trees of their last withered leaves. It roared so loud that we could barely hear the sea beyond it. The sea rose high, smashing against the cliffs. It wasn't angry, it was alive and ancient and uncaring. We stayed inside, huddled, listening to the roar of a world we could not hold back. By morning, the wall of lanterns was shattered, glass everywhere, oil staining the snow. The shelves had collapsed, taken by the wind or the waves. We stood together, looking at the wreckage, and no one wept, because we still remembered every name, even if the light had gone. We rebuilt it. Not the same, not with shelves, but with stone. Each person carried what they could find, rocks, bricks, driftwood, and together we shaped a new wall. Stronger, lower, wide enough to carry lanterns, but grounded in earth, not air. We didn't light it right away. We waited, let the cold pass through us, let the absence settle. Only when the wind grew still again did we return with flame. Some of us sang while rebuilding. Soft songs, fragments of melody, things half remembered. The woman with the grey shawl hummed a tune that made the boy stop stacking stones and close his eyes. He didn't speak of it afterward, but he kept humming it for days. I carved into the base of the wall, not forgotten, not erased, not lost, and beneath it, remembered by the quiet. It was the only thing we had left to offer, a promise that in a world where names could vanish, we would remain their keepers. We would be the last to know them, and the first to say them aloud again. Later we placed smooth stones beneath the wall, each one with a mark, a line, a star, a spiral, representing a soul remembered, a language made of symbols no one had taught us. It rose from the silence. It made sense only to us, but it spoke clearly. That night the snow fell soft. No storm, no wind, just white and light. We watched it from the windows, not speaking, just breathing. The fire inside crackled, and we knew the winter was not done. But neither were we. Part 16. The silent garden. The thaw came quietly, not with rain, nor wind, nor great cracking of ice, but with small signs, a drip from the eaves, the first green stalk pushing through the snow. the way our breaths no longer clouded the air quite so thickly in the morning. Spring in this place did not rush. It waited, watched. It arrived slowly, like an apology whispered after a long silence. We opened the windows. Just a crack at first, enough to let the smell of wet earth in, to hear the birds, one or two, then more, to breathe again without flinching. And we went to the garden. It hadn't been a garden before, just a patch of earth behind the largest house, once overgrown, then buried beneath snow. But someone had cleared it during the hard weeks, maybe to feel control, maybe out of instinct. Now, we all came. We turned the soil with gloved hands and pieces of old tools. We found seeds in the bundles left behind by travelers long gone. Onion, carrot, bean. Someone had saved them. Someone believed there would be another season. We planted them slowly. We didn't speak much, but we worked side by side. The boy watered each row with care, using a cracked jug we patched with wax. The woman with the shawl laid small stones around the edges of the beds. Another brought charred wood from the old lanterns, crushed it, and mixed it into the soil. Everything we did held meaning. Not ceremony, not ritual, just intention. By the third week, green returned. Tiny shoots, pale and trembling, pushed free of the dirt. We gathered every morning now to watch them, as if our presence alone would keep them growing, as if to say, "We are still here, you are too." We gave them names, not ours. The names we had written, carved, sewn. Each row held memory, a harvest not just of food, but of grief, of hope, of stubborn continuity. When the first blossoms came, pale purple, delicate, wind-stirred, we placed a bench nearby. And from that day on, one of us sat there at every hour, not to guard, to witness, to remind the world that something had survived. One morning, I found a small, folded note tucked beneath the bench. When you read this, I will be walking again. Not away, just forward. Leave a flower for me. There was no name, but we knew who had written it. We left 3 flowers instead, and a lantern. The silent garden became a place of stories. We began reading aloud there in the evenings, from old books, from journals, from memory. We told the tales we had carried like weights for so long, and slowly they became lighter. We cried sometimes, but we also laughed. We remembered things that had nothing to do with plague or death, a recipe, a melody, a riddle we never solved. The garden listened and grew. By summer, it was lush, overgrown in places, wild, real. The boy painted signs for each row, not just names now, but colors, shapes, images. The woman with the shawl began singing again, full songs, not just fragments, and I wrote everything down, because there would come a time when even memory faded. But if the garden remained, someone might find it, and know that people lived here, loved here, remembered. Part 17. The Letter That Waited. The letter had no seal. It arrived folded in thirds, the edges soft and worn, as if carried a long time in someone's coat, or pressed for months beneath a heavy book. There was no name on the outside, no mark. Just the crease of something, once held tightly, and then let go. We found it in the garden, tucked beneath the bench where we'd once left 3 flowers and a lantern for the one who walked away. The boy brought it to me. He didn't say a word, just placed it beside my notebook and stepped back. I waited an hour before unfolding it. The garden was quiet. The wind moved gently through the tall green rose, carrying the scent of thyme and sweet root. I read it aloud, though no one had asked me to. To the ones who remained, if you are reading this, then I didn't die alone. Even if I am no longer beside you, know that the part of me that mattered most, my memory, has been left in your hands. You lit lanterns for strangers. You carved stones for names you never spoke. You sat beside silence until it became sacred. You remembered. That is enough. Wherever I am now, I carry your voices with me, and I have left mine with you. I stopped there, unable to speak the rest for a moment. The others had gathered silently. No one moved. Not even the wind. I leave behind the stories we never told, the ones we carried like folded maps in our chests, always waiting for someone to ask. I leave behind a laugh shared over bitter tea, a glance caught in candlelight, the warmth of hands held when there were no more words. You gave meaning to my ending. That is the greatest gift the living can offer the dead. I was seen. I was remembered. I was loved, even if you did not know me. And that, in the end, is what survives. Keep walking if you must, or stay. But do not let the silence grow too wide. Speak the names, light the lanterns, keep the garden growing. And when your own time comes, may someone remember you the way you remembered me. I folded the letter again with care and tucked it inside my book. Later that night, we sat around the fire, not to mourn, but to feel close. We told stories not just of those we had lost, but of who we had become. The woman with the shawl shared how she once danced in the center of a crowded room. The boy admitted he'd never seen snow before this village. I told them I used to be afraid of quiet. Now I understood it. Quiet was not absence. It was holding. It was presence without demand. In the morning, I returned to the garden. I placed a small wooden post at the edge of the path, beside the first row we ever planted. And on it, I carved, "Let none of this be lost." That afternoon, the last boat came. It wasn't large, just enough for one. The sail was patched, the hull weathered. The person who stepped off said nothing, just nodded, and joined the garden like they had always belonged. We no longer needed words for welcome, only room, only light, only memory. In time, I passed my notebook to the boy. He was no longer a boy, really, but he took it with the same care he had once reserved for collecting stones from the shore. "I'll keep it," he said, and I believed him. I walked to the edge of the cliff one last time, the wind at my back, the lantern wall glowing behind me. I whispered the names aloud, one after another, until the sun dipped and the sky turned gold. This is not a story of survival. It is a story of witnessing, of carrying, of lighting one more candle in a world that has lost so many, and of never letting that flame go out. The Ender, thank you for listening to this story, and for being here until the end. If this journey touched you, even in a small way, I invite you to pause and reflect. Light a candle. Say a name. Share this story with someone who might need it. Please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next tale. And leave a comment below. Tell us where you're listening from, what time it is, and which part stayed with you the most. We remember together. Until next time, may your lantern stay lit. The Midnight Historian.